Shingy, welcome to New Video Frontiers.
Do you want to do that again? I can hear you rustling. I can hear you. I don't know whether you're rustling with paper or you got some goddamn. You're a total rustle right now.
He's always practicing. Look, you staring at me, and I'm so.
All right, hang on.
So, Shingy, welcome to New Video Frontiers.
Hi, Vincent. How are you?
I'm very good. It's quite interesting and a bit weird doing these digital events, but it's the future, I'm told. And our event has always been, as the name suggests, the event has always been about the future. So we'll give it a go. So I think one person who emailed me of the last couple of weeks coming up to the event, they were kind of curious. They said, "Oh, I'm really looking forward to finding out what Shingy's been doing since leaving AOL." So fill us in. What have you been up to?
Well, it's not AOL. It was AOL and Verizon and Yahoo and all that combined as Verizon Media Group. So yes, I'm definitely known as the person who left AOL. So correct myself in that correction. What have I been up to? Trying to figure out how to answer that question really well. No, but truthfully, here's a couple of things. I took some time just to pause. Vincent, I'd been on the road 300 days of the year. I have a young daughter. I was the guy who would try and promise to come home every weekend and see my family. And yeah, as that person who is a constant output machine, I needed to replenish and learn. So I did some really sort of intimate events where primarily the audience were minorities and in the marketing space trying to, expand their career in marketing. And I'd come off from doing a bit and I'd sit and I'd listen and I'd stay there for a couple of days and really absorb the content, which for me was incredibly refreshing. So I've become a student, but I've also spent some time understanding, how I could treat this go round as a portfolio, which is why I left. And, wanted to understand what that really looked like. What is the gig economy going to feel like? How is it going to be if everyone's going to think about, I don't like the word side hustle, but people talk about that. And so I never really got to focus on one of those. So if I treat it like a portfolio, what does that really mean? So the only way I could talk about it was to live it. And at the same time, make sure that the core of the ethics that I believe in, the ethos of my own human truth was part of it. So I've been really selective about what I've been doing and who I've been talking to and how I've been doing it, because I also want to make sure I see the sunset or the sunrise at an ocean somewhere. So that's the most important thing for me. But it's been refreshing and it's been unique. And then of course when March rolled around, it accelerated everything for me. It also sort of helped understand that making a decision to not be someone who traveled so frequently, it completely crystallized my frequency there, and I feel really good about those decisions that I made.
Yeah, I think that learning time, I think that's something I've experienced personally with all of this, has sort of pushed us to develop a research business. And as you know, we've been presenting some of the research at the event, but just having that time to just doing 60 interviews across different European markets and just spending time chatting to people about what they're experiencing. That learning probably wouldn't have been something I would have been able to have time to do personally had it not been for all of this. And I think it was a wake-up call for myself, that it's very easy to stay in your old modes of working and to not sort of refresh your mind and your thinking and to sort of take a step back from it all. So I think that's been...
But Vincent, can I just add something else to it? So prior to March, I had a few months where I really did start thinking about the portfolio differently. What brands do I care to engage with and try and help them, with cultural shifts? Also understand, what do I do about continuing being an educator? Could there be something I do more formally there? Looking at online education, etc. So lots of things that just felt like, this is kind of where I'm thinking the dimension goes. And then as March happened, I did what everyone else does. You go through these moments, and I equate it to driving a car. So we're driving a car, everything will seem to be okay, but then suddenly the car stopped or the lights dimmed. I go, cook, the engine wouldn't start or the on switch wouldn't do its thing. And when it did start up, there are 3 phases I believe you go through. You spend some time looking in the rearview mirror going, okay, what's back there? What caused this to happen? Why did the car suddenly stop in this zone? You spend all this time, it was really good back there. Why do we just drive through that? And then you spend some time at the dashboard where you're like, hey man, what is happening here? I just want to make sure that my battery is good. What happened to the radio station? Why can't I get back to what I was listening to previously? Have I got enough fuel in the tank? What's going, is the dashboard okay? And once you get through that fogginess, you start to look at the, beyond the bonnet and you let your peripheral vision get further away, and you're now looking at the horizon, you're going, I'm not quite sure where we're navigating to, but I'm going to trust my peripheral is going to get me there, and I'm going to be smart enough that I'm not going to run into a deer if it jumps out in front of me. And you go through these phases, and it takes time, and that's what happens with the human condition, man. When you go through this, and it's shared, you know, you're sharing it as I'm sharing with it, and we're the other side of the world together. But it's not just, oh, it's an American thing, oh, it's a European thing. It happened to everybody at the same time. And I think what that's done is it not only has it accelerated time and future, it's also accelerated your own sense of it. So you come out of that dizziness and think, okay, what am I going to do? And how am I as a person engaging now with brands differently? Or am I? And I think it's a totally different mix of that analogy I just described to you, coming in and out of your life at different times, depending on how you're affected by the signals that are sent to you, whether that's media, friends, social, whatever it is you're getting your signals from. And you're going to go through the constantness, where I felt like previously we were all going down the same highway and the same path, almost feeling like we're driving the same goddamn car. So it feels really refreshing to sort of feel like, oh, we can meet people where they need to be met now, which is different. So I'm sorry I didn't answer. That's a little bit of a longer version of the question, but that's more like a segue into what the heck is going on. Because, you know, since March to now, you know, I felt like I was on a trajectory and I'm just a different person and things are different. And I find the observation to be fascinating.
Yeah. No, I think what the hell is going on is the overarching theme of this year's conference. I think everyone's trying to...
You're welcome.
Yeah. Yeah, we can use it on our literature. So how are brands adapting? I mean, again, you know, another theme is this rapid digital acceleration that you alluded to. How are brands adapting to this, the brands that you're speaking to?
Okay, so look, I think there's a really interesting way to see this. Again, that analogy, as I said, that you look backwards, sit in the moment, look forward. A lot of brands, certainly in the quiet times, were probably not able to really accelerate their advertising or the way they engage with people how they would like to, because truthfully, there's a demand issue, or sorry, a supply issue. There wasn't a demand issue, it was a supply issue. And with that comes the manufacturing of it. So why drive demand for a product when you can't supply it? And then on top of that, you've got the whole, well, you know, what's going to happen when I do supply it? Are people going to want to interact with it, et cetera, particularly for consumables? So, you know, I think that there's an ethos of how do you adapt and change? And of course, we see, I think the thread that I hear constantly over the last 6 months, the number one word I would use is empathy. The challenge with empathy is how do you do it authentically and not come off as a scene cheesy or me too? And I mean me too in the good way, not not the 2019 way. But what I do think about that is, so what do I mean by that? Really, it's about, and by the way, me too is different. When it's me too, it's like I'm empathizing with you. You know, I feel like that too. Yeah. You know, as opposed to, you know, the alternate. But what I do think is interesting is that if brands, and they did, I think very smart brands really did try and say, hey, we're here to support. And there's that video where somebody edited where they found every single video in the early moments of March and April where people felt like they had to advertise. And they really did, you know, just bring it all together, and it had this lineage and it had this frequency and consistency that felt like there was one agency popping out everybody's PSA ad. But what happened around that, I think, is the ability for brands to just stop yelling, and they just paused. And they've taken this moment to pause and listen and watch and see how people engage with their brand. So when we talk about humanizing brands for the last 10 years, the truth of it has happened quickly. Because if you're not telling somebody, this is how I want you to feel about my brand, and you allow somebody to express it, things can happen. I mean, in the UK, I thought was really interesting as Cadbury came out with a, is it called Twirl? I think it's Twirl. It's a chocolate bar, but it used to be a limited edition chocolate bar, an orange version of this product. And they had they're watching the conversation and realized that people were really looking for nostalgia and they wanted this bar to come back. So it was the first chocolate bar, I think, to have a pre-sale, which I thought was pretty amazing, man. So they're able to, in a time where it felt like, wow, what are people really leaning into? You know, apart from empathy, it's nostalgia. So why not resurrect a product that people feel comfort with? It's not in our mainstream manufacturing. We can't manufacture it quickly, but we're going to manufacture it now and put it in pre-sale. And I've heard that with other companies as well. So, you know, let's say that you're a spirits brand and people find that, you know, lubricant drinking is happening. However, because you're not going to a fancy restaurant and spending all that money in a restaurant now, you actually may invest a lot more in a spirit that you normally wouldn't have bought. So you're still spending, but you're spending it differently. So there's an opportunity for brands to sort of understand that, okay, if this is what's going to happen for quite some time, maybe we can change our product lineup to suit people's change. I look at somebody like Unilever, man. They did a beautiful thing where they decided to try and do ice cream on demand, because in the middle of summer, there could be more demand for nostalgia, and ice cream is at the top of that list. Yeah. And they teamed up with a company that did the drone delivery. And the idea is that you could, 3 punnets of ice cream could be almost magically delivered to you. So I think those sort of cultural moments around product is really kind of a smart thing.
Yeah. This school of thought, I mean, as we're talking about this digital acceleration, people like Ad Contrarian, who we've had over to speak at our events in London before, he would sort of argue the case that, great brands cannot be built online, or, aren't built, or, is that your view? Would you share that view?
No. If I can take a contentious position, I could join in and say, yeah, for sure. But let me take a different point, and we can come back and decide whether or not we agree. But if you look at a lot of the D2C, so the direct consumer acceleration, that is all done through social contagion. It's building your brand using the sight, sound, and emotion of what digital can do. With that came this influx of incredible brands that you've never, ever experienced before. But you buy into them because they're really building all their principles of awareness and intent and desire and action. So the whole 80 principles have already circulated beautifully into it. The brand iconography, all of the sentient that you would expect from something that physically has been in the world for potentially hundreds of years can all be essence online. The challenge with that is longevity.
Yeah.
And firstly, your model has to twist and turn to make sure that when the product comes in the door and you unpack it, that it feels like something you've just bought in on. And if it wasn't glistening, gorgeous, whatever, sustainable, ecological, it wasn't ethical, emotional, if it wasn't any of those things, look out, because that's going to come back and bite you in the bum. So I would say that yes, to a certain degree, but no. I think you can actually you can build massive contagion for something that is online. The challenge is, certainly since March and the acceleration digitally, is that I think there is more demand now for offline brands to go the other way, to go digital. Mm-hmm. So in real life, remember that was a term of 2019, IRL. I mean, really in real life was something that we felt like, okay, you can build these brands online, now get them offline. Or, it's all about these experiences because we're spending all this time in this ethereal or the ephemeral. How do we come off it and feel like we're really getting our hands dirty on product or experience? So brand experience was one of those big buzzwords, right? The challenge is, how do you take that real world product and take it online? So I think the physical to digital connection there's an enormous amount of energy that can happen around that. A couple of things that can do that. The rebirth of QR. So QR is everywhere. I mean, if you've been in Asia for the last 10 years, it's just the common denominator to interaction. Places like WhatsApp have done a great job of it. WeChat have done an incredible job of it. So interacting just in physical world and digitally with QR, it's been incredible, but there hasn't really been a defining moment around design, advanced QR. So that's happening, I believe. Close proximity Bluetooth will help when you're able to be somewhere around 8 feet, 6 feet. So technologies that really do help you understand, how do I bridge the gap between physically touching the widgets and maybe interacting with it, but not being that close proximity, which I think is something that people are still concerned about.
Going to stay on the sort of creative theme. I mean, the digital advertising, it seems to be maturing. I think it's fair to say. I mean, I'm sure we've got plenty of greenfield space in the future, but it is maturing to a degree. But I put this out on Twitter recently, actually, just how I'm seeing less and less advertising that wows me in the way that a page takeover used to. That big splash where your screen jumps out at you and this brand smashing. And I'm not saying we don't have good creative. I'm saying that the technology doesn't seem to be leveraged in imaginative ways anymore. I think there's a long list of reasons that people offer, from everything from programmatic right through to it just isn't very sort of cost effective to do those integrations anymore. But do you feel like the industry digital has lost a little bit of its magic that it had in the early days, maybe a little bit lacking in imagination compared to years past?
Depends. It depends around what you determine as advertising. So if you just said buttons and banners across the internet that you can buy today that are IAB approved, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I would say, yeah. And here's why we've really not capitalized upon that opportunity, Vincent. Every single brand on planet Earth I speak to have a T-bar strategy. They want to touch every single person on planet Earth horizontally. Awesome. Programmatic will do a ripper job of doing that for you. At the same time, they'll have a deep, intimate relationship. Really? Okay, so that intimacy is the hardest challenge. And do you think a 728 by 90 and 300 by 250 is going to give you that intimacy? No. And when that was invented back in the day, it wasn't really designed for brand marketing as we try and force it into today. It was designed around direct response. And what we have done as an industry is not evolved those beautiful formats that have been cut across every single website on planet Earth. The challenge is we now have blindness, and we've developed that blindness for the last 20 years. So the only thing that has adapted and changed is the ability to target your audience more infinitely. Awesome. So if that's the case, the next pivot around that is then frequency. How often are you going to target that audience? What we haven't focused enough on is what you're going to put in front of them. And here's the challenge. You know, for the last couple of years, people still treat creative as a non-working part of a media strategy. Are you out of your mind? At the end of the day, with crappy creative, you're never going to get a great media strategy to execute anyway. So I think there needs to be confidence, just generally in the industry, to say, yeah, we sucked at format, but we equally have sucked at creative. And so it's our job to have creative separate and actually create something that feels like it's engaging again. So here's what I believe. You have direct response advertising, and that's the programmatic and all that great stuff. And it is great because it's really allowed people to advertise to a vast audience. However, you've got this beautiful ebb and flow of emotional advertising, which is all about brand building. So you've got sales overnight, direct response, and you've got brand building, all this emotional bits and bobs. At the end of the day, those two creatives, in my humble opinion, should never meet. The challenges in the last, 5 years or so, since certainly acceleration of programmatic, people have been treating performance-based marketing and emotional-based marketing the same, and they're trying to force it into the same performance indicators. And I think that's completely inappropriate. So I would argue that, yes, there is a massive opportunity for change, but we also have to change the way that we manifest that, because the way that we're thinking about it from the old way of agency, media, and creative is wrong. I would also argue that advertising has been redefined. So, when we were at AOL and, I helped out with media, as you know, we were definitely trying to say we have programmatic and one of the largest around, awesome. But at the same time, we're also trying to come up with incredible advertising. And we took a nod from the old media magazines. When you flip open a Vogue, you get 20 pages of ads, which are all glorious, that feel like editorial. And then you get to the editorial, which sometimes feels a bit donk in comparison to the ads that we just flipped through. But if you can bring those two together, that's really what we try to do with Devil. Devil now is something that's probably 10 years old. Yeah. But the idea of it was incredible, right? And so was iAds when it came out with Apple. But the problem was the cost, implementation, and the availability, meaning the audience wasn't big enough for marketers who want to touch everybody. Yeah. Now, I would argue that micro or slow journalism was going to take a comeback. I said that 10 years ago. And what did I mean by that? It means that instead of keeping these homogenized environments, we felt like anything that is new is news, people are going to spend more time in things they really care about. I think Reddit have got that right. So you've got communities in places like Reddit. And, I think there's also an interesting time because it's pretty contentious. So politically, it's a great place to hang out. But, this could actually be really good native advertising in those communities. I mean, the most obvious piece of native advertising across all those social communities, people who do, great dance videos on TikTok, that's a branded video in many respects. Today, you just may not know it. In some of these more matured platforms, which TikTok pretty much is, you have to label this stuff better so people understand it. But when it's really authentic, what is an ad feels like content. And what is content could feel like an ad. And this is not new. This has been going on forever, man. Music videos have lent into this. You're suddenly driving down the road in a Corvette and, you have the great spirit bottle that turns up. It's pretty bloody obvious at times. But there is authenticity to it. It feels like, that feels like it's all organic. But when it feels like you're reading a page and a big dirty ad comes up against it, it doesn't feel like it actually has anything that feels like it's part of the organicness. I think people see through it. That's why ad blockers have been a thing for the last 5 years, dude. Yeah. We just have to think about them differently. So all these channels matter, to paraphrase. It's just a matter, it's all about context. How are you actually turning up as a brand in the context that people want to feel it in? And if you do advertising in the context, it feels like advertising, it's going to be perceived as advertising, which will have a low interaction rate.
So if I was to give you a
Sorry, in my humble opinion. All right, carry on. What's your next question?
So if I was to give you a magic wand, and you could rock a magic wand quite well with that hair. You've got a wizard vibe going on. It would suit you. But if you could solve,
Vincent, piss off.
If you could solve
Go
one problem in digital advertising today, aside from IAB units, what would you solve and why?
Wow, I think I summarized it in that rant that I just gave you, which was the ability to understand that the client's performance indicators, their pressure as a brand versus the way that potentially an agency and creative interact today doesn't necessarily feel like it's in tune with the platforms that are accelerating.
Yeah.
And there's always a catch up. So that's one thing I would like to do, which is, have brands lead engagement in a way that felt like, oh, we created that, as opposed to the platform creating it for them. So that's one thing. The other thing that I think needs to be fixed is just appreciation for what I think is different. So you've got direct response versus brand creative, and they do different things. And we need to understand that that's what they do. They're there to do different things. And one is about spend. You want to get more people to your front door. Awesome. Spend more money. It's going to get you there, and they're going to respond better. But if you're also trying to allow Vincent to close his eyes to remember what that brand was that he bought that was in a sustainable, eco-friendly clothing line that he can't remember right now, then you have to do more about tugging to the heartstrings, I think, not just, because those things that you just told me you had a sustainable product. That's not a direct response. That's probably more of an emotional decision. So fixing emotional, which today brands are calling empathy in my mind, and also fixing the pipes to make sure that we're getting to the audiences that will care. Because I'll tell you two things for sure. We cannot stuff the genie back in the bottle. I would argue that even as we move and shift into this new world, the dynamic of spending time digitally is probably not going to shift to a factor of 100 or 50. But I was reading that, some people, social consumption, certainly during March to now-ish, has gone up 50%. That's a lot, man. Yeah. And for some people, just being online has gone up 30+%. 33, I think, was the average. Now, here's what I think is remarkable about that. As this blurring of work and home has happened, so is the balance blurred. But there's an opportunity there. So if I'm in a workday mode and somebody decides to tap into my, emotion about what I want to do outside of the work environment, there's an opportunity to do it in a time that is a day part that's very different to anything we've seen in the past. So if we're in this for a while, man, I think people could totally re-engineer the way that we market to people if we get ahead of it, because it's not about day parting anymore. It's not about just audiences that are based on demographic. I think it's far more about psychographic. I think it's far more about emotional domain. It's also far more about accomplishment and different types of emotions that I could be tapped with. And if you could message that, I think that's really important.
So looking into your own future, what have you got planned for next year? What's the future hold for Shingy?
More of the portfolio, man. I want to still work with brands that I think are really doing incredible work, culturally, particularly now it's accelerated. So I'm excited about that, Vincent. And, who knows, maybe next year I'll get on a plane. But until then, brother, I'm just trying to figure out how these behaviors change. So, if you think about it, what do these communities look like? I've replaced FaceTime for FenceTime, or I'm trying to at least have socially distant conversations with people. How are we socially, in this world of being socially connected, how are we using it to satisfy all of those things that we talk about? That's another piece that I'm thinking about. Will creativity really be unleashed next year? Because I think this year it's been hibernation mode, and there are some elements of creative being unleashed, but it's not through advertising, it's through actual new products or listening, building new franchises. I mean, I think if I look at what Diageo's did, the beer version, is it Guinness maybe? They did these pop-ups where people were so devastated they couldn't get out to a pub that they brought a little tiny pub as a little garden shed to people's front lawns and created these little acts of joy. So I'm sort of intrigued by that. How to embrace the slowdown and sort of figure out what that might mean in terms of how people are going to interact, particularly as this virtual connection sustains. What does slowdown mean truly? And how do you actually use that as a good moment, not just as a lane to stay in? And also with everything that's been going on politically, socially, culturally, how are we defining the line between ethics? They're messy as. I'll just give you an example. You think about this pre-COVID, the conversation we were talking about and celebrating was things like climate change and sustainability and how to make the world a better place. And then now in COVID, it's like if something's not wrapped 6 times in plastic and comes in baby kid gloves and, sits and rests in a quiet corner so I can spray it all down. I mean, there are certain things that we felt ethical about that just, it tugs at me, man. It's very challenging. And to get back to a place that we feel like all the things that we were believing in, how do we do that in a new paradigm? And that's just going to be something to observe. So I'm pretty excited about that. Sorry, that's a mouthful, isn't it? I've got a lot.
Yeah, it was better than saying, more of the same.
No, not more of the same.
Yeah, but thanks so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Vincent, it's always a pleasure, my brother. Take care.